Hi everyone, I'm Em Osborne. I'm a social worker and personal wellness counselor here at Fleming, and I guess the founder of Queer Connections. We'll talk more about what Queer Connections is in this first iteration of Queer Connections, but I'm really excited to be here today at Fleming with the Trudy McFadyen, who is just, I think, a staple at Fleming when it comes to supporting queer folks here on campus. So excited for you to hear this conversation. I feel like an important part in discussions with queer folks is allowing people to introduce themselves and use the language that you use to describe yourself. So can you introduce yourself?
I can. I'm Trudy McFadyen, and I'm queer, and I'm also part of Fleming College. I've been here probably 17 years in multiple different roles, starting out as a faculty member. Went through that and taught many different programs in many different programs, and then I took on a role at Fleming SAC, or Student Administrative Council, as the programming and engagement coordinator. And I also am a co-founder of Fleming Colleagues. And that's a group that we developed in 2019 for staff who identify as 2SLGBT, ally, or PFLAG, parents and friends of lesbian and gays. And so to me, being queer, being in a big institution hasn't always been easy, but now that people know who I am and I'm more seen out there in the community, I really enjoy working with students and staff.
It's funny because when I started at Fleming and I was clear to my colleagues that I, self-identified as queer, everyone said your name. You need to meet Trudy. And so I feel like I was always looking out for you in the hallways until I finally found you in your fedora with your buttons, because that's how people always describe
They
you,
do.
wearing your fancy hat with your buttons. But I think what's interesting about your story is that you've been at Fleming for such a long time and you've seen so much change,
Right.
Over the past 17 years. And so I'm really curious about what your experience was like when you started at Fleming as faculty. Did you share with people that you were queer?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. Previous to working at Fleming, I was not out in my work environment. I didn't feel safe. Mm-hmm. I didn't feel, I didn't want people to start asking me questions about my personal life. And it was a little bit dicey. It was like, I just didn't feel comfortable. And what was very interesting for me is even walking into Fleming and as a faculty member, part-time at that point, it was actually another staff member or faculty who came up to me and started saying, "Oh, so what does your partner do for a living? Is she doing blah, blah?" And at that point, I felt like I was outed. Mm-hmm. And that was very uncomfortable for me. But I, again, skirted around the conversation. But later on, I had little pieces going in. But what was interesting also is that I still didn't feel comfortable where I could put pictures in my office of my family. Of people who I love, who I care for, and I definitely would not wear the hat out in the halls or anything, because there was still that, was I going to be, harassed or discriminated or any of that kind of stuff. Yeah. When it changed for me was all about students, and I was teaching a course in what we called Issues in Diversity. Okay. And that was the course that I taught for a number of years. I enjoyed it. Different pockets of students that took this course, mostly justice people. But at that point, Rick Mercer, right? He used to do the rant. Is that right?
Yeah.
Was that him? And he did a rant on TV, and he was talking about a young gay male who committed suicide. And he was Rick was enraged, because why do students have to go through this? And why is it happening, especially to queer kids? And he made a statement, and this is the piece that changed my mind. And what it was is he said, adults don't need role models, kids do. So if you're gay and you're in a higher position, you're a teacher, you're a police officer, you're a lawyer, whatever it is, it's time for you to come out and be supportive to younger generation and be there for them. And so I'm kind of paraphrasing what he said, but it struck me that here I am in a role of a teacher,
role
right?
of power.
A lot of power over a lot of students, and I'm gay, and I don't tell them. So I walked into the classroom, and I thought, today's the day, and I was a nervous wreck. And at that point, I think I had 4 or 5 sections of this class, and so I shook, but I said my truth. And at that time, I could see the students in front of me, and some of them had tears rolling down, some of them had smiles on their faces, and at that point, they came after class and they hugged me and said, thank you. Thanks for being you. And that was the beginning.
Wow. I think it's so interesting that that is what led to the shift for you, because I think that's a message that a lot of people resonate with. And at the same time, like even now, like years and years later, there are still so many students, I would say faculty, and like other folks at this college and other institutions everywhere that still don't feel safe doing that. And it's the people who, whether it's like through privilege or, just like feeling more comfortable within yourself and based on your life experiences, you do feel like you can come out and share that. And that continues to pave the way for people who don't feel safe to do that yet, or are still exploring too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that, it was around that same time that I thought, okay, well, I've done this, and I know there's more in the college. I know there's more people out there. And that's when Fleming Colleagues started.
So tell me about that, how that began.
Okay, so it was, at that point, there was somebody senior to me in position, and who was also queer. And I talked about, I know there's a lot of staff that, because I know them, but, we don't really talk about it in the halls.
Yeah, it's like
and
unspoken
that's the unspoken stuff. And she said, why don't you start a group? I thought, okay. Anyway, that ended up that I personally started going to one and one and said, hey, would you be interested in being part of a group? And so we had 5 people.
Okay.
There was 5 of us, and down in the lower cafeteria, we sat in front of a fireplace, and we sat there, the 5 of us, and we had a great conversation. And then we said, you know what? We used to call each other colleagues. It was kind of the secret word. You're a colleague of being gay or queer. And, well, let's call ourselves the Fleming Colleagues. And it stuck.
And I think, like, yes, there's this piece about students feeling comfortable, and like we work in this institution for students. And another piece of it is like making, current staff, but also new staff feel comfortable, because I think there were so many things that I learned about when I was hired that immediately to me signaled like this is an okay place for me to be
Right.
clear about who I am. And that just snowballed into something completely different in my role, right? Like when I was hired on, I was not hired on to specifically work with queer and trans students. And now my role has changed so much in such a way that like if someone wants a queer identified counselor, I'm able to offer that service. And there has been so much interest in that, and I think it's given us so much more information about like how many queer and trans students we do have at Fleming. And that was information that we sort of got through student groups, but I don't think we always had. And it's been so telling of how important spaces that are queer focused is to
Right.
people, whether that's like through the Fleming Colleagues group or like providing counseling for queer specific students. And I think it just shows that need for ongoing like identity focused support.
Absolutely. And another part that clues into that is with Fleming Student Administrative Council, they have clubs.
Yeah, and the FSA.
And the FSA.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the Pride Alliance, which is here at Sutherland, and then Birds of Paradise, which is at Frost.
Yeah.
And the, you know, the organization, and again, I'm going to just snip in there that during COVID, things kind of went off to the side. And so when I was in the role in Fleming SAC as Program and Engagement Coordinator, one of the things I really wanted to do is get clubs up. And so they had something that was called a Club Fest, which would encourage people to sign up. And specifically, Pride Alliance blew me out of the water because I bet you I had over 70 people that signed up for that club.
Yeah.
And so that in itself shows me that, you know, whether they're questioning, whether they're queer, trans, bi, it doesn't matter. You know, there is a need out there.
Yeah.
And for them to feel comfortable in their own skin.
Yeah.
Come to college and be unique, be authentic, right? And we encourage that. I feel great that I can walk into the college and be me.
Yeah.
You know,
Wear your hat.
wear my hat,
Yeah,
you know,
be
and
visible.
I get a lot of times where people say, if I don't wear my hat, where's your hat? Right? And the reason I wear the hat is because any of the buttons that I have on my hat resemble marginalized groups, and people can see the pride flag, the inclusive flag, they can see the trans, they can see the Indigenous Two-Spirit, you know, any of those kind of things are on my hat. And then if somebody says, oh, I love that button, I'll give you the button, right? If that's what it takes to say, you know, symbolism does make a difference. At this college, we didn't always have the flag. And it wasn't until our president said, yeah, we're going to put the flag up and it's going to stay up.
Yeah.
And we had a flag raising. And I was so proud of that moment, you know, and, you know, we have flags around the school. You know, Diversity and Inclusion Department has done a great job, but is it enough?
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, we're here, but we always have to work together. So your role is critical, you know, because you're identifying and supporting students in their vulnerable times,
Yeah.
right? And you're there, and you're one person. So how can we support and help? We've had conversations.
Yeah.
We've had conversations in, you know, as Fleming Colleagues and that, and around doing more,
Yeah.
right? And you see students more in that vulnerable spot, and knowing that we need more.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting in my position supporting queer and trans students because, like, there are people that I see who are like in the very early stages of exploration, and that is something that like brings me so much like it feels so nourishing to be able to support someone in that journey and provide that safer space for them to do that exploration. And I also think about the value of community. And I think sometimes it's a challenge coming to a place like Fleming and trying to find your place within a bigger institution. You are here to be in school and do well academically, hopefully graduate. And there's so much more to the experience that people can get out of it. And I hope that people get out of it. And I don't know that everyone is after the pandemic. I think this is a big thing that I see people struggling with, that disconnect in social relationships. There's like, I'm seeing more social anxiety amongst students and that difficulty of reaching out to make those connections. And I know that that's something that you see too when you try to facilitate those connections for students. It's hard in my role because I see so many students coming to me who are feeling really lonely and isolated, and you know, for confidentiality and privacy reasons, I can't connect my clients with the other clients that I have. And that makes my job really difficult because there are so many people struggling and feeling like they're isolated, and I want to find a way to connect them to others. And I think student groups like Pride Alliance and Birds of Paradise are really wonderful ways that students can connect with other students and all other clubs that we have on our campuses. But it's also, we see so much turnover in the college, just
That's
nature of our programs. We have students for 1, 2, maybe 3 years, depending on how many programs they're in, how long their program is. And it's hard when that turnover, how that shows up in student groups, because you know, we get a student group off the ground and then someone graduates, and we don't have to start at square one, but in a way they are starting over every year. And so I know we've talked a lot about how can we offer more ongoing stable support for students so they can create these student groups and, you know, do really wonderful things with Pride Alliance, Birds of Paradise, but also how can we as staff, faculty, how can we support students as well? And so I think what was born out of this was this idea for Queer Connections and starting a group that I will facilitate, but I'm hoping that it will eventually be partially student-led, where we're just creating a space every other week where students can come, and it's a queer-focused space, and we can talk about what it is to be a Fleming student, what it is to be a 2SLGBTQ plus person, what it is to experience mental health challenges, if that is something that comes up for people, family challenges, questions about identity, all the things that people experience. But just trying to create a, I'm not going to say safe space. I don't know that safe spaces are possible to create, but a safer space that we can have those discussions, because I think sometimes that's what students are missing. And I always try to have conversations with students one-on-one when I see them that are about those things. But I think that need for community is so clear right now, especially following the pandemic.
Yeah. I think the one thing, as you're talking, Em, that is really important. Yes, we can have all of those things. You know, they focus on their academics, but there is stuff that's more than that. It's about the socialization. We can have clubs, but when they focus on clubs, is it as specific as this is where that group, the Queer Connections, comes in, because it's smaller, but it's more organic. Is that a good way of putting it? That they're not focusing on, which I think that's the responsibility of the clubs, is that they reach out to a bigger crowd, like the 70 students. You know, but what I hear from you is that the Queer Connections is something that's a little bit more personal, it's a smaller group, but it's also ongoing, that people can come in, they can come out, they can have their, you know, it's their community.
Yeah.
That's what reminds me of the Fleming Colleagues. Like, I can sit as an adult, as a staff member, faculty, that the Fleming Colleagues sits there and we can talk about what's happening to us.
Yeah.
You know, and we need that. I think any human being needs connection.
Absolutely.
You know,
It's groups like that that are flexible enough that they can be whatever you need it to be in that moment.
that's exactly
And I
right.
think that's what my hope is for Queer Connections.
Yeah.
Whatever you need in that moment, whether it is just connecting with other students, whether it is like learning some coping skills because you're having a really hard time,
Right.
whether it is just being in a space and having some snacks, it is whatever you need it to be in that moment. And
It's their space.
exactly.
It's their space, and they are the ones that they know that's where they can go. You know, and but that's what you're trying to develop, and I think that is so important. You know, and they have connections even beyond that, because they make friendships.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not something that, you know, just because somebody graduates, they'll celebrate that, but then there's another person coming in the door that's brand new, that it's going to be welcoming for them.
I'm just thankful that you were willing to have this conversation with me today. I think the whole idea behind Queer Connections is, of course, starting this group for students, but also finding other ways that myself and others can connect with people in the Fleming community. And so whether that is students coming to the Queer Connections group or having more conversations like this, I recognize not everyone will feel comfortable coming to our group. And so maybe listening to audio of this
Right.
conversation or future conversations is a way that they can feel that connection and feel a sense of community, even if a group is not something that they're ready for or are ever ready for. And that's okay too.
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, I'm hopeful if there are other people in the Fleming community that folks want to hear me or you or others have a conversation with, because we can learn so much from each other's perspectives. I hope that people will let us know who they want to hear
Absolutely.
from. Yeah.
I think that, you know, coming here today with you, I'm grateful. I'm very grateful of that. And I know that there are people out there, you know, that care and want to support students the best that we can. And so you've got a dynamic idea that will solidify and, again, bringing it back for the students. So I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Okay.